First, a notorious crime that 2 months ago made headlines all over Britain. On Wimbledon Common in southwest London, a young mother, Rachel Nickell, was waylaid and repeatedly stabbed. Her scratched and bruised 2-year-old son was found clinging to her body. It appears to be a random killing, which of course makes it extremely hard to solve.
Today we're discussing a crime that shocked all of Britain. Its investigation became the most expensive in the history of the country. Detectives who investigated this case called it the crime scene with the most horrifying thing they had ever seen in their career. The story begins with a woman named Rachel Nickell. In 1992, when this story occurred, Rachel was 23 years old. She had a 3-year-old son named Alexander at the time. Rachel and the child's father, a man named Andre Hanscom, were not married, but nevertheless lived together as a family. Their relationship was built on love and deep mutual respect. After the birth of their child, the couple settled in southwest London in Wimbledon. While Andre worked hard to support the family, Rachel mostly stayed home to care for the young child. Sometimes, due to her natural beauty, Rachel did some modeling for various magazines, but mainly she dedicated herself to motherhood. On July 15, 1992, around 10:45 a.m., an elderly man was walking his dog in the vast public park of Wimbledon Common. At some point, something caught his attention. At first, the man spotted a naked pair of legs on the ground and assumed someone was sunbathing. But as he approached, he realized he had stumbled upon a horrifying scene. A young woman lay dead in a pool of blood. To add to the heartbreak, a little child stood next to her. Her son, Alex. You probably guessed that the body was Rachel Nickell's. For her, this day was like many others. In the morning, she walked in the park with her son and dog. She walked there a lot because she thought it was safe. But sadly, where she felt safe is where she died. The police came right away. Even the police, who see a lot, were shocked by how cruelly Rachel was killed. This was the worst murder they had ever seen. Rachel had over 50 stab wounds. They were so deep that they hurt most of her organs. But there's more. Her throat was nearly cut off and her pants were found nearby. This means the murderer might have hurt her in other ways, either before or after she died. While one group of medics attended to Rachel's body, another team focused on her son. His face had a few scratches, as if he had been dragged face down on the ground. Those were his only physical injuries, but mentally he was clearly traumatized. He had witnessed the murder of his mother right in front of him. Despite the large number of people in the park that morning, no one reported hearing Rachel's screams or seeing the attack. No murder weapon was discovered, and although foreign DNA was detected, its origin was unknown. The only clue was traces of red paint found on the head of Rachel's son, Alex. It led to a theory that the attacker might have been a house painter, but this was mere speculation. In essence, the police had no concrete witnesses or evidence. Wondering where to begin their investigation, the police spoke to Rachel's boyfriend and the father of her child, Andre. He was deeply affected by Rachel's death. He even mentioned having suicidal thoughts after her passing. Only the realization that his son needed a strong figure by his side deterred him from acting on these thoughts. Unfortunately, the conversation with Andre provided little help. There was nothing unusual in Rachel's life, and no one harbored ill will towards her. The police began to think that the attacker didn't know Rachel personally, and that she might have been a random victim. At that point, the police's only hope was to gather information from the sole witness to the crime, Rachel's 3-year-old son. Following the tragedy, young Alex was placed under the care of a child psychologist. Everyone understood that reliving such traumatic memories would be distressing for a child, but it was crucial for any leads. With his father present, the psychologist conducted several sessions with Alex, attempting to extract a description of the assailant. After some days, Alex managed to recall a white man with a short haircut, wearing a white shirt, blue pants, dark shoes, and carrying a dark bag. The attack, as per his memory, happened swiftly. The man seemed to emerge suddenly, pushed Alex down, causing minor facial injuries, and then violently assaulted his mother. Parallel to this, the police received a tip from a woman. The murder of Rachel Nickell was widely discussed in London, and this woman claimed to recall an important detail from that morning. She too was in the park that day and had noticed a man who acted suspiciously. She first spotted him around 10:15 a.m., heading in the direction of where Rachel would later be attacked. Given that Rachel was murdered between 10:20 and 10:30 a.m., the timing was noteworthy. The woman found the man suspicious because he seemed to be attempting to conceal his face. Later, at about 10:40 a.m., she saw the same man again, this time by a river, washing his hands. He quickly left upon noticing her. The description she provided matched Alex's account, reinforcing the belief that they were describing the same individual. With a composite sketch of the suspect, the police conducted a massive search over several weeks, but couldn't locate anyone fitting the description. More than 500 individuals were interrogated, but the investigation hit a wall. At this juncture, the police enlisted the assistance of Paul Britton, a renowned forensic psychologist. Often referred to as a profiler, Britton pieced together a criminal profile. He deduced that the man likely lived near the crime scene, was single or had past negative experiences with women, and had a peculiar hobby, possibly linked to occult practices. Most alarmingly, Britton believed that Rachel might not be this man's last victim. Armed with this new profile, the police resumed their search but once again hit a standstill. For the first time, they decided to appeal to the media for assistance, revealing their findings to the public.
This man too was in his late 20s or early 30s. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, and he too had short brown hair. He wore a light top and loose-fitting jeans or trousers. Again, he was carrying a dark bag. Again, if it was you and you had nothing to do with the murder, call us now, 081 811 8181.
A composite sketch was presented on TV alongside a description of the suspect. The police received numerous tips, with many pointing to a man named Colin Stagg. Several reasons led the police to focus on him. 1. He bore a resemblance to the police sketch. 2. He matched the profile provided by the forensic psychologist. 3. He was 29 years old, fitting the age range. 4. He lived only 1.5 kilometers from the park where the attack took place. 5. As predicted by the psychologist, he was single and had no known relationships with women. Given these coincidences, the police promptly decided to search Colin's apartment. While they found nothing directly linking him to Rachel Nickell's murder, they did discover many occult objects, books, and drawings. A large poster with a pentagram was also displayed on his wall. After the apartment search, Colin Stagg was detained for questioning. Without formal charges, the police could hold him for only 2 days. Throughout this period, Stagg vehemently denied any involvement in Rachel's murder. The police then tried to corroborate his alibi. Stagg claimed he had walked his dog in the park from 8:15 a.m. to 9:15 a.m. on the morning of Rachel's murder, suggesting he was home over an hour before the attack. Yet no one could verify his whereabouts since he lived alone. Contradicting his account, a neighbor claimed she saw Stagg leave his home at 9:30 a.m. that day, heading towards the very park where Rachel was killed. According to her, he wore a light-colored shirt and blue jeans, which closely matched the police's description. Stagg contested this, suggesting the neighbor had confused the days, and insisted he was home from 9:15 a.m. onwards on the day of the murder. Further investigation into Stagg's past revealed another troubling detail. A woman had recently accused him of indecent exposure, claiming he had appeared naked on the street in front of her. When the police questioned Stagg about the incident, he claimed it was a mere misunderstanding. He was merely sunbathing nude, not anticipating anyone would see him. However, the police had another lead. Previously, we mentioned that a woman had reported a suspicious man she saw in the park. This woman was then called into the station. Out of 9 people, she identified Stagg by his knees as the man she'd seen shortly before Rachel's murder. Was this solid evidence of his guilt? No, it only confirmed he was in the park that stormy morning. In essence, at this point, the police had no concrete evidence against Stagg, forcing them to release him. Only after Stagg was released did a new lead emerge. A woman named Julie contacted the detectives. About a year earlier, Julie had placed an ad in a dating column. A few days after the ad's publication, she received an explicit letter from Stagg detailing his sexual fantasies. Julie never responded. Still, her account about her unsettling exchange with Stagg gave the lead detective on Rachel Nickell's case, Keith Petter, a daring idea: to go undercover. The operation's goal was to draw out Stagg's darker fantasies, hoping he'd confess to Rachel's murder. If he confessed, it would be incontrovertible proof of his guilt. Conversely, if he didn't, it would exonerate him. The essence of the operation involved using a female officer as bait. This officer, given the pseudonym Lizzie James, was tasked with corresponding with Stagg in hopes of extracting a confession. It was a high-stakes operation. If anything went awry, the detectives' careers would be on the line. The backstory was that Lizzie was a friend of Julie's, the woman who'd received Stegg's earlier letter. The operation commenced in January 1993. On January 12th, Colin Stegg received the first letter from Lizzie. Here's a brief excerpt. Dear Colin, I hope you don't mind my bold intrusion into your life. We haven't met, but I feel as if I've known you for years. Perhaps you recall writing to a woman named Julie? She's a close friend of mine, though a bit conservative in her beliefs. Some time ago, while she was away, I came across the letter you sent her. I'm quite curious to learn more about you. Stegg, seemingly flattered by the attention, promptly responded. Over the next 7 months, undercover officer Lizzie James and Colin Stegg exchanged 43 letters. Lizzie's letters were filled with explicit fantasies, while Stegg's responses were more restrained. As Lizzie's letters grew increasingly explicit, Stegg's answers remained cautious. Despite Lizzie's provocations, Stegg offered no hints connecting him to any crime. In a bid for answers in March 1993, detectives adopted a bolder approach. Lizzie stated in a letter that she enjoyed domination and submission, expressing a desire for Stegg to take control. Contrary to police expectations, his reply was gentle, suggesting, I don't want to hurt you, but if pain brings you pleasure, then I'm prepared. By May 1993, Stegg expressed a wish to meet Lizzie. Detectives viewed this as an opportunity to learn more about him. They arranged a meeting in a public park, enabling undercover officers to discreetly monitor their interaction. During their first face-to-face, Lizzie shared a fabricated story about witnessing the sacrifice of a pregnant woman. Yet, even faced with this disclosure, Stegg remained reserved. However, he handed Lizzie a letter at the end of their date, which rekindled hopes in the operation. In this letter, Stegg described fantasies involving knives, envisioning blood on them. He detailed sexual fantasies set in Wimbledon Common Park involving knives, cutting, and blood streaks. It was his first mention of knives, blood, or deriving sexual satisfaction from such acts. Further pushing him, Lizzie brought up the Rachel Nickell case, admiring the perpetrator's ability to elude capture. Stegg confessed being a suspect, saying, Truthfully, they think it was me. On May 21st, a Monday, I was stopped by the police. The fact you appreciate this, that someone could pull off such a crime, is intriguing. In a surprising twist, Stegg gave a candid interview to the press, firmly denying involvement in Rachel Nickell's murder. Detectives realized that getting a confession was improbable. The undercover operation was terminated, and they refocused on the evidence they had against Stegg. Despite the operation's setbacks, they believed they had substantial evidence against him. They primarily banked on the testimony of a woman who spotted Stegg in the park around the time of Rachel Nickell's murder. His resemblance to the sketch police created based on the description by the only crime witness, Alex, Rachel's son. Lastly, Stegg's letters to James, which detailed fantasies about knives, weighed heavily against him. Consequently, Colin Stegg was arrested on August 17, 1993. During the subsequent interrogation, he remained silent. Detective, on July 15, 1992, in Wimbledon Common Park, you killed Rachel Nickell. You stabbed her multiple times. Stegg, no comment. Detective, now, about the fantasies. The escalation in your letters to Lizzie James, increasing deviance, dominance, cruelty, the desire to humiliate and dominate. To shake him, detectives unveiled that Lizzie James, with whom he had been writing and met, was an undercover police officer. Detective, remember this letter? Remember those fantasies you shared? The police showed you pictures of Rachel Nickell, and you mirrored her posture, lying in the same position. You replicated her pose, her head tilted just so. Do you recall that? Stegg, no comment. Over a year after Rachel's murder, Stegg was formally charged and awaited his trial, which was set for September 1994. Despite the lack of tangible evidence against Stegg, detectives were confident in securing a guilty verdict. Their confidence was shattered when the judge disassembled the prosecution's arguments. The judge severely criticized the undercover operation and expressed doubts over its legitimacy. Given the lack of conclusive evidence, Colin Stegg was released. The judge declared, "There's no physical evidence against him. No confession, nothing." This proved a monumental failure for the London police. The Rachel Nickell murder investigation was Britain's most extensive and expensive to date, with over £3 million allocated to finding the perpetrator. The outcome was far from what was anticipated. The lead detective on the case felt compelled to resign, and the officer who portrayed Lizzie James followed suit. As for Stegg, while legally innocent, the court of public opinion wasn't as forgiving. Several incidents of vandalism targeted his residence post-release with the recurring message, "The killer lives here," graffitied on his walls. Regarding the ongoing investigation into Rachel Nickell's murder, it hit a brick wall and the case stagnated, becoming what's referred to as a cold case. In 2002, a decade after the murder of Rachel Nickell, the Cold Case Group reopened the investigation. Over these 10 years, much had evolved, but no new evidence or suspects emerged. However, advancements in medical examination, particularly DNA analysis, were significant during this period. Over the next 18 months, experts meticulously examined Rachel's clothing. To the astonishment of the police in July 2003, these experts discovered traces of male DNA on her clothes. The pressing question was whether this DNA belonged to Colin Stagg, the primary suspect in Rachel's murder, but the results came back negative. The DNA did not belong to Colin, so whose DNA was it? After a year-long search in July 2004, the DNA was finally linked to a 38-year-old man named Robert. Now, the task was to unravel the mystery of who Robert was and how his DNA ended up on Rachel's clothes. Robert Napper was born in 1966 in southeast London. He was the oldest of 4 children with 2 brothers and a sister. Robert's childhood was difficult, largely due to his parents' troubled relationship. Father frequently physically abused both the mother and children. As a result, when Robert was 12 years old, his parents divorced. His father simply left the home and never re-entered Robert's life. Robert was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, which in simple terms is a developmental disorder. It makes it challenging for a child to engage with the outside world, particularly with other children. Perhaps the pivotal moment in the guy's life occurred when he was 13 years old. During a hike in the forest, he was sexually abused by a man who happened to be a friend of his mother. When he was 16, Robert left school. He got a job loading crates at a local warehouse. Over time, he started walking the streets and secretly watching women. He'd walk with them home and keep watching them through their house windows. At 23 in 1989, he was watching a single mom with 2 kids. She was hanging clothes on her balcony's 2nd floor. Robert went to her back door. It was open. He went inside, passing her 2 kids in the kitchen, and went up to the 2nd floor. There, he assaulted a woman, raping her. After he was done, he told her to lock her doors before leaving. The police only became aware of this months later. Surprisingly, Robert escaped consequences. It's unclear whether the woman didn't report the rape or if the police simply weren't interested. Regardless, they didn't investigate him. Following this, Robert's mom, concerned about his mental state, cut ties with him. This didn't deter him, however. He continued observing women, and in early 1992, he began a series of attacks on women near a park called Green Chain Walk. This earned him the nickname Green Chain Rapist. His focus shifted to young mothers with children, and he stalked this new type of victim. In May 1992, he assaulted a woman in a stroller, raping her at knife point. His crimes escalated. No longer content with assault and rape, he sought to commit murder. His new target was Rachel. She often visited Wimbledon Common Park. After following her, he attacked on the morning of July 15, 1992. He killed her and then raped her. His departure from the scene was eerily unhurried. He then washed his hands by the river before leaving the park. By August 1992, he attracted police attention, though not due to Rachel's case. It was associated with a series of rapes along the Green Chain roads. The police had a sketch of the rapist from the victims. 2 neighbors of Napper told the police that he resembled a photo robot. The police twice invited him to the station for a DNA sample, but he didn't appear on both occasions, which was strangely not a cause for police concern. Furthermore, he was later excluded from the list of suspects. The reason for this exclusion was that all the victims described the attacker's height as being over 180 centimeters, while he was actually slightly shorter. This discrepancy led the police to stop focusing on him. So much was said about Rachel Nickell's murder that it seems like the most terrible crime. However, this isn't quite the reality. The upcoming segment delves into extremely violent events through detailed descriptions, although no graphic imagery will be shown. The intensity of the descriptions may be disturbing for some. Please proceed with discretion. In July 1993, Robert Napper's attention turned to 27-year-old Samantha Bissett. On November 3, 1993, Netter climbed onto Samantha's apartment balcony and entered her home. He encountered Samantha in the corridor and attacked her with a knife, delivering 8 blows. One of the strikes was so forceful that it fractured her spine, yet this was not enough for him. He proceeded to the adjacent room where Samantha's 4-year-old daughter Jasmine was sleeping. He raped and later strangled her, leaving her lifeless body amidst her toys. He cut her skin from her throat to her intimate area, then skinned her. He opened her chest, breaking her ribs, and inflicted several knife wounds on her internal organs, despite her already being deceased. After finishing these gruesome actions, he cut off a few skin fragments, placing them in his jacket pocket. He then arranged what remained of the body provocatively on the bed. Subsequently, he departed from the scene. The following morning, Samantha's boyfriend discovered her mutilated body. Initially, due to the extent of the mutilation, he struggled to comprehend what lay before him. At first, he thought they were parts of a mannequin. Only upon grasping the horrifying reality did he contact the police. The law enforcement officers were equally astonished by the sight. Each officer deemed this crime as the most brutal they had encountered in their careers. After investigating the crime scene, even the police photographer was deeply affected and left the force altogether. The gloves and shoes collected provided little substantial evidence. While several fingerprints were discovered, they were all linked to either Samantha, her daughter, or Samantha's boyfriend. Therefore, the now serial killer Napper left almost no traceable evidence. For more than 6 months, the police were at a standstill in their investigation. A breakthrough finally came when the lead investigator decided to reevaluate the fingerprints found at the crime scene. A few days later, the fingerprint expert admitted to an error in the initial examination. Now he was certain that 3 of the fingerprints found at the crime scene did not match anyone previously suspected. This discovery led them to Robert Napper's fingerprints, which were already on file in the police database due to his past criminal activities. When the crime scene prints were compared to Napper's database prints, a surprising match was found. Robert Napper, the murderer of Samantha Bissett, was arrested. Given the striking similarities between the Samantha Bissett case and the Rachel Nickell case, the determined lead detective suggested that the team investigating Rachel Nickell's case consider Robert Napper as a potential suspect, especially now that his involvement in Samantha's murder had been established. During that time, the Rachel Nickell investigation team was convinced they had identified the killer, suspecting Colin Stack, but in 1995 it was revealed they were mistaken. The trial of Robert Napper occurred in 1995. During the trial, he admitted to the murders of Samantha and Jasmine, as well as 4 rape cases along the Green Chain Roads. However, due to his mental state, he was declared insane and was sentenced to detention at the Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital in West London. Initially, Napper was questioned in relation to the Rachel Nickell case, but the police concluded that he was not involved in her murder. Yet, in 2004, a breakthrough occurred when DNA found on Rachel's clothes was linked to Napper. It became evident that he had lied. This led to a reinterrogation in June 2006, but this time Napper did not confess. Only in November 2007 were official charges brought against him. The case had been ongoing for a long time, and in 2008, he finally admitted to killing Rachel Nickell. He was found guilty of her murder. Robert Napper was not given a traditional life-in-prison sentence for the manslaughter of Rachel Nickell due to diminished responsibility. Instead, he was ordered to be detained indefinitely at Broadmoor High Security Psychiatric Hospital. After 16 years since the murder, the Rachel Nickell case was officially solved. Lastly, a few words about other individuals involved in this story. Colin Stagg, who had been wrongly accused in August 1993 of Rachel's murder. He lived with the stigma of a murderer for over 10 years, facing societal rejection and even physical attacks. In 2008, the London police issued a formal apology to Colin Stagg for the mistakes made in the early 1990s. He was compensated with £700,000 British pounds. Following his ordeal, Stagg wrote a book titled Pariah, in which he detailed his experiences. He has attempted to move on from the traumatic events and the wrongful accusation, but his name remains intertwined with the case. He admits that getting the cash felt a bit like winning the lottery, And he splashed out on cars, holidays, and gifts for loved ones because he wanted to live for the moment after his ordeal. Now, having exhausted his payout, he celebrated his 60th birthday this year while residing in a council emergency shelter.